My speech is on transracial adoption and its effects on mental health. And this is my piece of advice to all transracial adoptees and adoptive parents. The adoption process and community have implicitly as well as explicitly negatively impacted transracial adoptees in many ways concerning their mental health. The proper education and open communication about the mental health effects adoption can have on transracial adoptees is essential for those who follow suit with their family to know how to be aware of how to thrive in adoptive families that have chose them. Not every adoptee gets a chance to be educated on the mental health effects of what they may be affected by, but every adoptee and their family deserves to know its profound and positive and negative impacts, especially those who have been transracially adopted. The advice I have to give for transracial adoptive parents, as they are the ones primarily responsible for the adoptee's mental health, is to know your impact relies on how tentative you are when you take the time and effort to put your all into pre-adoption and post-adoption services. So let's start from the beginning of defining what goes into adoption. Adoption is an industry of placing children with legal guardians for the hope that those children are placed with eligible and hopefully long-term families. Any children between the ages of 0 to 18 years old with birth parents or legal guardians who cannot provide financially, physically, mentally, or emotionally and have to give up their guardianship due to lack of support they cannot provide are placed into adoption by the birth family or the legal guardian in the case that the birth family has died. Adoption is a practice run by the adoption industry that has many different laws, policies, perspectives, and information that vary from state to state and country to country. In her book, The Role of Race, Culture, and National Origin in Adoption, Adoption and Ethics, the author Madeline Freudenlich states that it is also heavily shaped by policy at the international, national, state, county, and agency levels, and by practice on part of social workers, attorneys, judges, mental health professionals, and others. Adoption has many different classifications, but mainly falls under 6 different categories with subcategories. ChildWelfare.gov puts these categories under domestic, international, open, closed, public, and private adoptions. The more undefined practices of adoption are interfamily adoption, transracial adoption, foster to adopt, and adult adoption, because those can fall under domestic, international, open, closed, public, and private. The transracial adoption practice is one of when a child is placed into a family with legal guardians of another race. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 1/3 of adoptions in the U.S. are transracial adoptions. Knowing that 1/3 of adoptive parents look to adopt interracially is one to be noted. The mental health of a transracial adoptee needs to be catered to by the parents because on top of adjusting into a biological family to an adopted one, they also have to adjust into being a part of a family that does not mimic their physical appearance as well as their biological backgrounds. According to Chris Begley in his book about transracial and international adoptees, he details that the mental and emotional effects of being an adoptee is shown through 7 emotions that mainly all adoptees feel. The 7 emotions are loss, rejection, shame, guilt, grief, identity, intimacy, and control issues. Loss of one family into gaining another is the real emotional definition of adoption, and as every adoptee goes through loss, simply by definition, each adoptee is on their own grieving journey. There are a lot of negative effects on the mind that the transracial adoptee can go through that the prospective transracial adoptive parent, as well as the current adoptee's families, need to know in order to contribute to the success of a child's mental health. Not only do they need to know it, they need to cater to it positively. The 2 crucial steps that adoptive parents can take are through pre-adoption preparation and post-adoption services in order to cater to the adoption before and after the act of adopting. In the article, The Mental Health Effects of U.S. Adolescents Adopted in Infancy, authors Margaret A. Keyes, Anna Sharma, and Irene Elkins noted that in the United States, 120,000 children are adopted annually, and adoptive individuals constitute about 1.5 million children younger than 18 years old. Most adopted individuals are well-adjusted, but the population-based studies have reported that an elevated risk for psychological maladjustment in adoptive children compared with representative samples of non-adopted children. In a recent meta-analyst finding that more than 25,000 adoptees reported significantly more behavioral problems among adoptees compared to non-adoptees. Pre-adoption preparation are simple steps that you take when adopting a child. Preparation for a transracial adoptee is arguably more emotionally intense for interracial adoptees than monoracial adoptees themselves. Examples of pre-adoption preparation are talking to adoption agencies about your questions and concerns about adoption, educating yourself through books about adoption, the adoption industry, and adoptees, as well as going into pre-adoption counseling. The pre-adoptive preparation could include a parent learning how to do the African American textured hair that differs from theirs. As I was growing up, my parents never really learned how to do my hair, so I would constantly straighten my hair in order to mimic theirs because they didn't take the time to get to know how to learn mine. It could also be something as drastic as what my parents also did, which is moving countries to ensure that their child, if they are internationally adopted, to ensure that their child is around people that resemble their physical appearance, to get to know their native culture and are not potentially stripped of it. In fact, in Uganda, where I was born in the 90s, it was required for adoptive parents to foster their child for a minimum amount of years, mine was around 2 to 3, before they could officially adopt. A part of their pre-adoption preparation was simply living in their home country. Alternatively, it could be getting advice from those who share their ethnic background, ethnic or racial background, to feel more in tune with their own. It is essential to recognize and celebrate transracial adoptees' traits before they're within your guardianship, because as fellow adoptee Melissa Gita Richards describes, it will make the environment visibly more accepting than having the implicit pressure of assimilation into the dominant culture. Assimilation as an adoptee is one thing that some adoptees may not feel they need to succumb to, but as any minority in a majority space knows, that similarity theory / attraction theory states that we are drawn to those who look like us or who are similar to us. As a transracial adoptee, the case may be that you are in if you are transracially adopted by a white American family as I am, you may be in a predominantly white family with a predominantly white city with predominantly white friends and very little representation of anyone who looks, acts, or thinks similarly to you. Pre-adoption preparation helps address the transracial adoptee's genuine and everyday reality and take steps to alleviate the shame or otherness feelings that the adoptee may go through by acknowledging that for educational purposes. Pre-adoption services should be taken very seriously by the parents, agencies, social workers, and for the adoptee's sake of their mental health. In the article where I learned primarily all about post-adoptive services, influencing risks and adoption preparation on post-adoption services use in U.S. adoptions, the author Leslie Wynn states that post-adoption services can be differentiated by general types of services, including ongoing meetings with a caseworker or participation in adoption, support groups, and clinical types of services, such as individual therapy, family therapy, and crisis intervention. Post-adoptive services are not widely as recognized or placed with as much importance as pre-adoptive services. These services solely exist to support the mental health of an adoptee. As I mentioned before, adoption in one aspect could be looked at as a process of grief, but transracial adoptees have the loss of their biological family, as well as the potential cultural or racial or ethnic ties that come with that. The importance of pre-adoptive preparation and post-adoptive services are important for the adoption industry, social workers, and counselors to encourage families to take on for the sake of the transracial adoptee. Since adoption is an industry of placing children with legal guardians for the hope that those children are placed in long-term families, it should also be an industry that encourages healthy, ethical practices The advice I have to give to transracial adoptive parents, as they are the ones primarily responsible for the adoptee's mental health, is to know that your impact relies on how tentative you are when you take the time to put your all into pre-adoption and post-adoption services, as it can impact the success of your child's life experiences.